I met the brilliant Helen Bowkett recently when she was teaching a Cornish hedging workshop that I signed up to. So, as you will hear, a Cornish hedge is not a hedgerow, but something quite special that exists only in this county. And I was writing an article about Cerdroia, which is a labyrinth made of such hedges. And being the geek that I am, decided I would sign up for a 2 day workshop to learn how to build these hedges in order to write this article. And as a result, met the brilliant Helen. And after the first day of hedging, I sat her down to ask her a couple of questions for the article, and we ended up talking for at least an hour. And I thought, I have to get this human on the podcast. It is a conversation ostensibly about Cornish hedges, but as you will see, one that runs far more broadly and far more deeply than that. Possibly my latest hyperfocus. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Helen. Could you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do and how you came to do what you do?
Okay, so I'm Helen Bowkett. I'm 54. I like being in my 50s. I didn't think I would, but I love it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And oh, how did I come to do what I was doing? I've had such a kind of weaving path through life, all in craft. I didn't realize that probably till about 2 years ago, that really it's always been a craft pursuit. I grew up on a small holding. So I grew up milking a Dexter cow before I went to school. So
Amazing.
land was like in my blood. That was what was normal.
In Cornwall.
Yeah, on Godolphin Hill, on a hill very similar to the hill where our land is now. Yeah, Godolphin, small village school. Grew up first early on the Isles of Scilly, which was amazing until I was really young. But come from a kind of like family of farmers and a family of academics, and this kind of mix between the two has just always been great, always been really interesting. So yeah, I love land, very comfortable on land, and then kind of did all sorts of things career wise, and sort of I ended up falling into gig rowing and falling in love with gig rowing. And I just was at sea for about 14 years, just rowing, coaching, training at quite a high level, really interested in the dynamics of bringing crews together, what happens when people are in rhythm, when they breathe together, when people come together and they're greater than the sum of their parts and all that stuff. So lots of interesting stuff. Whilst I was still a little kind of not sure what I was doing career-wise, I was kind of doing this. And then I was very lucky that what tended to happen is I fell into a career that came from my passion. So rowing was my passion for a long time. I ended up being a rowing coach, ended up working in outdoor education, expanding that into other water sports and mountain biking and all sorts of things. But always gardening for my sanity, going and putting my hands in the earth. And just because I love gardening, I just love growing things. So amongst that, myself and my husband were doing up very, very old rundown cottages and living without bathrooms for years and doing all sorts of things and bringing up kids and yeah, so I trained as a boat builder but ended up using that carpentry skill within restoring old houses more than a building boatyard. And then so I was working in outdoor education, doing quite a busy job there. And I got pregnant with my last son, Henry, and had a health scare in the pregnancy and went, whoa, I think I'm going to be a full-time carer.
Right.
And left that career and went gardening. And then from just gardening at a very low level, I very quickly kind of went, oh, actually, I love landscaping and playing with shape and form. And within that, trained as a hedger. My dad was one of the original steering group for the Guild of Cornish Hedging. And he was always saying, go and do your hedging course, And so I was going, yeah, Dad, I can't take 2 weeks off work. I can't. And in the end, I just, oh, sod it, I'm going to do it. Went and did it and loved it, just loved it. And it opened up this whole kind of avenue in the landscape gardening that I really enjoyed. So very quickly, I came away from linear hedges and was doing lots of curves and built-in seats and sort of stone steps and had quite often like a team of lads that I'd pull together and do something really exciting. Yeah, so I fell into hedging And then gave myself a couple of lifting injuries, which meant, oh, I need to rethink that a little bit, and wanted to teach sort of hedging, partly from having been a rowing coach for a long time. That just call to teach, to pass on the skill, was really loud, and I was very keen to teach women particularly, because so yeah, so it kind of, it wasn't a plan, Katie. It just like kind of, it was what's the next thing that's sort of showing up to do, and that's really kind of how it evolved. So now we're 4 years into stewarding, owning, whatever owning land means, stewarding land, guardian of land, with our own kind of 13 acres on the side of a hill, which is where I kind of came from as a child. Now I have my own stewardship of land as the hedging training site that we use for CREST, but it's also where I want to play at depth in hedging, so yeah. So it's hedging is part of the whole farm
Yeah.
evolvement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we
There's
will
a
we
whole
will
load of
get into depth in hedging. But before
great.
we do, we met when I took a 2-day Cornish hedging course with you, and I think we should start with the 101 for listeners who aren't familiar. What is a Cornish hedge?
Okay. Cornish hedge is a natural boundary, and it is technically termed a stone-faced earth bank.
Hmm.
That's what it is. So it has an earth core that is normally a subsoil, a poor grade earth. It can be built with topsoil if that's all you've got. But it's basically a packed earth core with stone facing that is set in on a curve. So it's a curved batter going inwards, and it is that shape of the hedge, that borrowed arch, that gives it that integrity.
Hmm.
So,
So
but
in cross
essentially,
section, it's kind of the shape of a lighthouse
yeah,
or an oak tree. It starts
yes,
thinner at the top and widens out towards
yes,
the
it
bottom.
flares out towards the bottom. Yes, lighthouse is that's a perfect kind of shape, if you took it as a cross section.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what makes it very sort of unique. And that curve can be slightly different, kind of depending where you are in the county, but essentially that's what sort of is recognizable as like, oh, that's the Cornish hedge.
Yeah. So it's not a hedgerow. It's
No,
not as simple as being a wall. It's kind of
yeah,
perhaps it's got bits of both of those things in it, and it's unique to Cornwall.
that's it. And it
Um,
can have a hedgerow on top. So it
uh-huh.
can have a hedgerow, or it maybe doesn't have a hedgerow. Like where I am in West Penwith, it might have the occasional ancient hawthorn that's growing horizontally because of the wind. But essentially, sort of dropping down in the valley, they may have a hedgerow, but they might just be shrubby gorse. They might have nothing. So it just is very much a reflection of the weather and the
Mm.
kind of habitat of where you are.
They are everywhere in Cornwall. There
Yes.
are 30,000 linear miles of Cornish hedges in
Yep.
Cornwall, which represents 1 million hours of
Mm,
combined labour that I find incredible. And some Cornish hedges on the Penwith Peninsula have been dated to 3,800 years ago, which makes them A, contemporary with the latest pyramids,
mm,
and B, what we think is the oldest man made structure in the world still in use for its original purpose.
that's
I
right.
mean, I've lived alongside Cornish hedges my whole life and only recently discovered those facts, and they just blow my mind. This thing that we're surrounded by is just so much more incredible than I think most people realize.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I when I when I learned hedging, that's been recent for me as well. Even though I was working as a hedger for, 4, 5, 6 years, sort of within landscaping, and then I came to teach it. It was only really as I started to teach hedging that dropping in of the kind of awe about it was just really significant for me. It was profound. It wasn't
Mm,
something that came with the first introduction to the craft, and it wasn't something that really kind of um, landed in me until really recently. And I think it's probably because it's as I've been more and more aware of kind of where we are as humanity, and then looking at the hedges, these two stories are kind of drawing and weaving in together. And I think it's just deepened the story in the hedging and then deepening all of our kind of questioning of everything everywhere.
Feel very lucky to have had you as a teacher because we definitely got that sense on my very first experience of hedging. So it's a real skill, isn't it? And we saw that when the hedges that were built alongside the new A30 collapsed within days.
Mm.
What makes a good hedger? What are the characteristics that hedgers
Ah,
seem to have in common?
this is such a good question because I've thought about us. The group of us that came together and formed CREST, there was about half a dozen of us as hedgers. We're all really different characters. And I'm thinking about, what is it that is unity amongst us? And I think what really comes out is that all of us are able to kind of, first of all, we're comfortable in our own skin, on our own, in, all day with our own company, sort
Mm,
of in the outdoors, not fazed by weather, able to walk into a situation and that can look really chaotic. A lot of stone on the ground is chaos, and see, yeah, and know that there will be order from that chaos. So it's this sense of like just dropping into kind of rhythm and flow and know that it'll all come together. So there's a calmness in it.
mm,
There's definitely kind of like that artistic and creative theme that runs through, so that there is that when you're looking at, let's say two or three stones they just work and flow together, and there's real pleasure that, there's that reciprocal relationship with the work and the craft, that there's that joy that comes back from going, oh, that fit was beautiful, and you can just keep going back to that hedge and go, oh, I like that fit, I like that fit. So there's this pleasure in the work, that where the work resonates, and there is a real giving back, as you create this thing. And I think that's with all crafts, that joy and that love. There is a love that goes into it, and I think all the hedgers I know feel that, but
yeah.
they may be very different characters. I also think along the way, there is often a story that's brought someone to the hedge. And
Mm,
that story can often be a struggle. A lot of us have talked about not fitting this century, just don't fit the modern world. And it may have been a work burnout, it may have been a troubled teenage sort of route. It can be anything, but there's normally some story of facing ourselves and going, okay, I need work that keeps me well. And I don't think this is much more my language than I think other hedgers would
mm,
use, but I think there's a recognition that the hedging is medicine and therapy and healing, and that grounded work keeps us really well. So
yeah.
I think whether it's something that other hedgers talk about or not, I think there's that common grounding that we know it's earthing us out in every kind of
Yeah.
aspect. So
And you
yeah,
talked about kind of dropping into rhythm and flow.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think in 2 days we got a tantalizing
Um,
glimpse of that.
I know. I can't remember where it was. I was somebody else was talking about a course, talking about you have to have the second day, and the second day is really hard, but you've got to go through the second day. So not you in a 2 day course, it's really hard. Like, I'm so glad you've got a glimmer of flow. And what normally happens on a 5 day course, 2 days, there's like few heads down at 2 days, and you just go, keep going, keep going. Okay, just relax. Because what happens in flow is that basically, in order to see stone and to see shape and to see form, you need to relax. And the more tense you are in the stone, it's literally like you become stone blind and you start seeing the chaos instead of going, okay, just don't worry. There's no pressure. Nobody is making you build that hedge fast or with speed. We're literally the slow food movement or slow build movement. And it's that thing of just there's a place by normally the third day on a 5 day course, everybody has had a sense of flow. And then they'll lose it again. completely. And then, but there is definitely this sense of flow where, and we have one hedger, he's lovely, and he's always talked about like stone of the day. And like he says, you have your stone of the day. And, but it's like, don't get your stone of the day first thing in the morning, because it's like, then the day is hard, but there's always a stone of the day where you've just gone, I've seen it, I picked it up, I put it in, and I was with that stone, that sort of just deep satisfaction of kind of being in flow with the kind of build, so. And I think flow state is really interesting because it's such a mindset, and we work so hard against ourselves, and it used to happen in rowing, same thing, you don't relax, shoulders tense, you fatigue your body instantly, sort of. So this whole thing about, meditation mindset within hedging, which I think the hedgers as working hedgers just do naturally, they basically just drop in, but it doesn't take long. It's like our bodies know this stuff. We're not programmed to be totally on edge. We're not, technology does that for us. If there is that sense of like just kind of acceptance around the pace and the earth and the stone and just there's no pressure, then, people drop into this space.
Yeah.
And then it's lovely. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because modern life is all about hustle and hard work, and we're kind of constantly tense, ready for the next crisis or demand on our time, or global catastrophe or whatever it is. And this idea that actually to be a good gig rower, to be a good Cornish hedger, to be good at many craft, actually, I would say it's the opposite of that. It's letting go a little bit, holding it lightly, kind of loosening your body up and letting it find you almost, rather than kind of chase. And I definitely had a moment of that on day 2. I definitely had my stone of the day. I could still see her. But yeah, just that sense that, I mean, it's so much to learn. It's phenomenally complicated when you're learning, and it all makes sense on the blackboard, and then you get outside and all of a sudden none of it makes sense. And then there's a moment when you get it, and it's a beautiful and special thing. You mentioned a team of lads earlier, and I know that when CREST was first formed, was it the Guild of Cornish Hedgers? You were the only woman. Tell me what it's like to be a woman in such a male-dominated field, and sort of talk about the pros and cons, I guess, of being that often only female in a literal field full of men.
Yeah, I was a real tomboy when I was young, so I was always comfortable in kind of in a male environment, comfortable doing sort of what would be termed sort of men's work. I was always kind of gravitated towards that physical work. So, and I like working with men. I like the energy of men. I like the kind of directness, the straightforwardness. I do like that. So I think what was really useful for me was, it's a theme. I look back and it's just a theme in my life. I mean, I was the only female student with 30 boat builders, sort of, it's always been there. I like being that kind of odd one in that situation. So I was lucky that I'm comfortable in that environment. So there was no part of me that felt like I shouldn't be there, or I was questioning myself. And I didn't feel questioned by being there. But I think what helped is that I had, coming into hedging from that background, I'd already been working in carpentry, restoring houses. A lot of it is about that confidence, about terminology, around, the things that can intimidate you when you walk into anything new. And especially if it's a very kind of male environment and you don't know the name of a tool. And suddenly you can feel like an inch high, but that happens anywhere. But I had that kind of confidence around the language around building sites, landscaping sites. I'd worked with a phenomenal digger driver early on in hedging, who was such a lovely, gracious man, a little bit older than me. And he just taught me so much. He just taught me so much about land preparation, about drainage, about looking at land, about water management. And, he never treated me any differently in any way because I was a woman. And and I was just really lucky to have a few mentors like that that were just, just brilliant and just gave me a lot of kind of knowledge that then kind of had that confidence. So but I was really aware that although I was dealing with this okay, I was really always aware, like, why aren't there more women here? What's going on why aren't there more women here? Women can hedge just as well as men. And, if the heavy stone is an issue, get small stone and build smaller stone hedges, just work within your kind of means, which I did later on.
It was
So
so
yeah,
interesting, just to interject there, Helen, that
yeah.
when we were building, there were 3 women and 2 men, weren't there, on our
Mm,
course? And the chap next to me was lovely, such a sweet guy, and kept saying things to me like, if you need me to lift that stone for you, just let me know. Katie, let me know if I can help you. Whereas what you were saying to me is, Katie, you don't need to lift that stone, you can roll it. Or Katie, you can use a smaller stone. And I just thought, I really noticed the difference between I'll do it for you and I'll show you how to do this with the
yeah.
body you're in. And I thought that was such an interesting contrast, that if I was always surrounded by people like that very lovely, genuinely kind man, I would never have learnt to do it on my own. But
Mm.
because you were there, you were very much kind of an advocate of, well, let's find a way to do this with the strength you've got and with the body you've got. And I just found that a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think that whole sense, what I see with women who come to the hedge is that it's so empowering.
Mm.
And, it may be the first time you've picked up a lump hammer, sort of, and really, and like, with the stone, you got to strike it hard. This is not a soft sort of option, sort of, and that is just so it's so great. It's so great seeing women use their bodies well and use them intelligently. And like there is this thing with kind of like, I don't have the physical strength of a man. I do not have the shoulders. I was always very strong and I came from sport, but I never had the strength of men. So I always had to work stone differently, sort of work. But it means you just got to like have a different technique around you. And I know one of the stonemasons that we worked with, he said one of the best stonemasons he saw was first of all, there was a really good woman, but there was also a bloke that he knew, stonemason, who was tiny, and he did all his work with a 2.5 pound lump hammer, tiny, but he was so technically accurate. So it is just like, about, using your physicality in the most intelligent way and not fighting it, and just going with it. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think in lots of ways I've been lucky with the mentors that I have had through life, that I haven't received much of that. Hang on a sec, I'll do it for you. It's like, this is how you do it. Are you all right? You give me a shout if you need a hand. But like, I've been one of the gang in the same way. I haven't been treated differently in that way. But when I think the thing that I noticed was different about being a woman within this kind of story that has unfolded with hedging is that it's been useful. It was a useful tool in a way when we first started doing that kind of advocacy around hedging, because it went on to the endangered craft list. And then there was a real interest in, you're a hedger and you're a woman. It was like not the other hedgers. And for a while it was great because it was a useful tool to get the message across, this craft is endangered. And because my language is different, my language is different you know, um, to maybe what a working male hedger would use. I'm much more comfortable with talking about inclusivity and kind of community and relationship building. And that was very much what was really kind of driving my interest in it. And yeah, and it was really useful. But there was a point where I was going, hang on a sec, are you only kind of talking to me about hedging because I'm a woman, sort of like, and I was kind of, constantly kind of bringing in the men, and talk to Andrew, and talk to this one, sort of keep it balanced, don't,
Mm.
it's, just keep it fluid. It's a shared thing. I'm not the only woman craftsman now, which is so good. So good. For me, that's like a major, major thing that we passed out to women on the CREST training. That was so good. And I watched them work, and one of the younger ones particularly, I don't know, she must be about mid-30. I just see myself in her as a young hedger. She reminds me of my body and how she works her body, sort of when I was young. And I just think, oh yes, great, it's really good. And
It's also so lovely to hear women's bodies being talked about in that way, because often when you say a
mm,
woman's body, you're thinking about what it looks like, right? That's the immediate,
mm,
when you say like someone's body does this, or it's always an aesthetic judgment, whereas the way you're talking about her body and your body and my body is about what it can do,
oh
and that's
yeah,
such a, like, just in this moment, that is such a beautiful shift in kind of the way women's bodies are talked
yeah.
about.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because yeah, no, that's right. Because I think, yeah, that's really interesting because I remember saying to you when we were hedging together, and I remember saying to you, lean in, lean over the stone, get your shoulders over
Mm.
it, get your weight over it, sort of use your body like that, sort of your body is that working tool. And
And it's that whole body thing, isn't it? Rather than just
yes,
your arm, it's kind of
yeah,
and I think I had a very academic upbringing. And so I think I've spent a lot of my life understanding my body as just something that's required to move my head around, and the idea of fully embodied actions, that I might be using my arm, but actually I need my shoulders in it, I need my back in it, I need to be,
yeah,
that's relatively new for me, and it's quite exciting. I think, again, it's a different way of thinking about your body, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I love work. I love physical work. I mean,
Mm.
and to me, I think in a lot of ways, I've got a very academic brain, but it'll drive me mad. It'll drive me
Yes.
mad if I don't work physically. I mean, it really
Yeah.
will. It can be my worst enemy. So yeah, and I think I see that a lot in hedging. I mean, I see so many kind of hedgers with acute intelligence that really need to be on the hedge.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm.
So, historically, do we know why Cornish hedges were built? You mentioned on our course that this wasn't a sense of ownership, it wasn't a get off my land marker. There was kind of more to it than that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that for me, that journey with working with historians and archaeologists in the CREST project, and then sort of, just thinking about this more deeply, and also this growing global awareness of the indigenous cultures that are still holding wisdoms that haven't lost that, and looking at those and thinking those cultures and thinking, you know, this concept of owning land is really new, and I think it was for me when I bought the land, it was like I own land, but I suddenly had massive unraveling of what does that mean. So and how do we ever own land, sort of. So it was this, what is this, and then in looking at the hedges and thinking, a culture that comes in as a new culture of boat people arriving into this country thousands of years ago, and kind of basically sort of being, transitioning from hunter gatherer to kind of farming in this culture. It wasn't about land grab and creating a boundary. And it was basically a pioneer farmers clearing the stone in order to be able to grow the first crops in these land and clear the trees. And so it's a different spirit in which they are built. And I think alongside that sort of train of thought, I was also, and I think this is that looking at that sense of like, how did we used to relate to land? What have we lost? Because we've lost our oral traditions that pass on those wisdom. We've got a break in our lineage, and other cultures don't. And this sense of animacy within stone and within soil and within trees and within rivers, and culturally those kind of ancient cultures that have still kept that alive. And so there's nothing written down. This is only surmising, but to my mind, it's this sense of, if we came in to build hedges, grow hedges for the first time as pioneer farmers, and we're moving stone. And so many cultures around the world see stone as our ancestors. They see, there's First Nation tribes that say they call stone grandfather stone, and there's like First Nations in Australia that the stones are the ancestors, and they are honored. They're honored in that way, and who knows, because it is a guess, but to my mind that is more prevalent amongst indigenous cultures, that would say to me that first culture of pioneer farmers would have had a more sacred relationship with stone as they cleared it from the fields. So they're not only creating and breaking ground for the first time, but they're also placing stone with maybe more honor and ritual on the boundaries. So the whole thing is different. It's like a million miles from where we are now,
Yeah.
sort of on a contracted hedge on the A30 going whack it up, click, boys, you got to bang out a load of meters per day, sort of we're so far away from that. But I think there's this real yearning amongst a lot of people, like this is looking for that sort of depth of meaning
Mm.
in work, or
I
that
think it's
touch.
really interesting because, clearly they protect wind from rain, they direct water. There's kind of a sense of literal protection. And you mentioned on the course that people might have put boots or shoe soles in them to ward off evil spirits. So to take that another level further and imagine that these stones that were sacred and animate were also offering some sort of protection
Yeah,
around the crop, around the thing that they're trying to grow for the first time to feed their families in a different way, it it stacks up, doesn't it? It sort of
yeah,
it feels like, as you say, if we look at the other indigenous communities from that era of history that have continuous lines to the present, those are the sort of stories that have been handed down through oral
yeah,
tradition. So it's not too much of a leap to imagine that our ancestors might have been doing
yeah,
something similar. Um, so that's my next question, was going to be, why are hedges so important historically, culturally, and environmentally? And I guess that's one of the reasons
yeah,
they are the only uncontinuous, or the only continuous link with our very ancient ancestors.
yeah.
What else gives them kind of significance?
Well, I think, like, building on that, I think what's so interesting is, like, we've maintained that relationship with the hedge. That hedge has borne witness to all of our journey in farming, all the agricultural revolutions that hedge has kind of borne witness to. And the hedge has been repaired and restored by so many hands over the centuries, and like gates have been taken out, gates have been added, there's been so much kind of shifting kind of in those hedges. And culturally, I think, sort of up until kind of really, fairly recent in this century, there would have been probably pre-World War One, there would have been kind of a workforce within the land that was tending those hedges, like casting it up. So, along the ditch lines, they would take the shovels and they would, cast up the soil that had kind of formed down the hedge, put it back up. That would scatter the seed bank. You're reflushing the kind of seeds. Hedging repairs, when you move the soil, you're brushing seed cases. So the relationship between the human and the hedge has been kind of integral in the landscape, and it's only degenerated in this kind of last century,
Mm.
particularly sort of like since World War II.
And
You
it's
know,
interesting that when hedges are repaired in that way, they support more biodiversity
yes,
than if they're left to go quote unquote wild. Like, I think that's
yes,
really interesting in terms of that kind of nature culture
yeah,
symbiotic relationship.
exactly. And we're part of it.
Mm.
We're part of it. We're integral to that. So we are, by our repair and restoration work, we're part of like maintaining habitat and biodiversity. Which, yes, which doesn't happen so much now. So yeah, so culturally as well, it's that thing. There is this, because all of the hedges across Cornwall just change because as you move through each region and you move through the stone of the county, which is so varied and different, the hedges change and they reflect the stone of the land, and they reflect the style of the kind of hedger, and you know, the hedger that intelligently made the best use of that stone and created the design that was going to make that fit. So you've got this kind of whole like patchwork of different style and design, which is the signature of kind of our history of hedging. So I think it's like, it's so interesting because it's not uniform in any way, and yet there's some sort of integral things that kind of bind it as a Cornish hedge, but yet it's so diverse and so beautiful, and people have that sense of kind of, oh, you know, that sense of recognition and belonging to their, you know, the land and the hedges of their land. Like for me, I'm just spoiled rotten in West Penwith because I'm in the most ancient hedges, prehistoric hedge system. The rest of Cornwall is kind of a medieval system. West Penwith is prehistoric, and I think like the land sort of like it resonates, that it's really powerful, you know, this granite that's 275 million years old that is like, you know, it's, yeah, it's amazing. And people love, I mean, people are so emotionally connected to the hedge, whether they've ever put their hand on a stone or not. There's a real love for them, you know, really.
Yeah, I went blackberry picking yesterday and was reminded of something you said as part of our course, which is that we've lost so much common land, we've lost so much contact with nature, but the hedges and edges are still ours, you said. And I love that phrase, like this idea that there's little bits on the edge that the farmers kind of don't care about, and this sense that as I was picking those blackberries, thinking how many thousands of years people might have been picking blackberries from that very same hedge. It's kind of mind-boggling. And the other thing you said, which I loved, was that hedges are a portal to the wild and a portal to deep time. And I really could kind of sense that when I was blackberry picking yesterday.
Oh, that's so good. I know, isn't it? It's just, yeah, I've been blackberry picking as well. It's lovely. I've been grazing. I've been blackberry grazing a lot, and I love it. Yeah, and it's true. It's funny that the hedges and the edges thing, I think, is really interesting for where we are, because you know, sort of these edges that were kind of ignored, you know, sort of in the last sort of, you know, few decades, they've been ignored. Prior to that, they would have been farmed. The hedges would have been farmed. They would have been firewood. They would have been foraging, but they've largely been kind of like ignored. But those edges are now the kind of sanctuary of the landscape. You know, we know that kind of within modern arable farming now, you know, sort of all your pollinators and all your pest predators are in the hedge, and they've only got a certain flight distance into the field. So where all these hedges have been ripped out and the fields are now massive, you know, those pollinators aren't going to get in the middle of the field anymore because their flight distance can't reach that. So these hedges are such a sanctuary, especially for organic farming and the kind of way of kind of, you know, where we need to go with kind of food sovereignty. So there's, and also, but what I love about the edges is that I think we also, I feel like when I see who comes to the hedge, who's drawn to putting their hands on stone and earth, quite often they are the people, I include myself in this, that are a bit fringe, bit on the edge, don't quite fit, you know, and I love that it's like the people that are on the edge and the fringe find community on the edge, in the hedge, you know, and it's like, it's where we are.
A friend of mine calls them edge walkers.
Edge walkers, I love that. And it is, and you know, huge, you know, lots of neurodiversity, and because it's so soothing, it's just such a brilliant kind of medicine and kind of meditation for that, for that kind of energy, you know. And but it is this sort of thing, and in permaculture you have something called the edge effect, where basically two habitats, when they meet together and two ecosystems sort of come together, there is a greater diversity from these two habitats meeting. And that's what the hedges are. You know, not only have you got a field system meeting the edge, but you might have a different field, or you might have a woodland on the other side. So you get this massive kind of rich biodiversity on this edge, because you're meeting you're meeting those differences in that pool. And I think people are the same, kind of when we meet our edges, like, I don't know whether it's for you, if poetry's an edge, for me, singing's an edge. It's like when I meet the people in those places, that's my edge, but it's far richer than anywhere else. And I think hedging can be an edge to meet other creative people as well,
Yeah.
sort of because it just holds so much story.
Yeah, and I think I have a working theory that the Cornish hedge could provide the perfect metaphor for how we need to meet this environmental crisis, and in fact, many polycrises that we're facing right
Yeah,
now. And I think so many things that you've said sort of feed into that. This idea of diversity and the importance of edges, and
yeah.
this kind of human nature or culture nature symbiosis.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, as well? Because it's that thing of like historically, on the edge, the hedges, you had hedge witches, and there's terms like hedge bunnies, where the sort of, the itinerant workers that slept in the hedge, and the hedge was always a slightly dangerous place, and sort of it was like where the fairy trees would whisk you away, and now it is that thing of kind of we're looking for where is the wisdom of the medicinal herbalists, where is it, where we need it now, and so there's this understanding of all this, hedge lore and folklore and medicinal lore that we need to kind of reconnect to and remember what we've forgotten, sort of. And so there's this renewed sort of respect. So remind me of your question again there,
I
because I
didn't
was
ask
just,
you a
yeah,
question,
no,
Helen.
no, no. It was like, no, what you were saying. I was just like,
This idea of the hedge as a metaphor for,
yes, metaphor. Yeah. And what I think is lovely about it is like, there's different layers to this. There's uh, when I first started teaching hedging, I was talking to a lovely mentor who was helping me navigate my family. And I was talking about hedging and talking about my own family. And I've got an interesting family and a lovely, beautiful, gifted, wild sister. I'm fairly wild. She's really wild. And she's like, and he said to me, he said, think of the hedge. He said, think of the hedge as like bringing your family together. And at the time I was renting a big house and bringing both sides of my family together because I felt the need for family. And he said, okay, so think of them like a hedge, and you know who your anchors are, you know who your grounders are in the family. So they're there. And then you can build your relationships on top. And some of them might not fit very well. It might be, and you might need to work a little bit at that stone, that relationship to get it to fit. But basically they're all irregular. They're all kind of their own color and their own kind of, feel, but they work together as a family. And he said, and build your hedge and just create it with the relationships that you can connect and meet with. And he said to me, and then he said, your wonderful sister, she's the blow-in seed. She's the primrose that comes in and finds the gap. You can't make her fit anywhere. She will find the gap, but you've got to build the hedge.
yeah,
And I love that. I just love this kind of sense of the kind of relationship building of the hedge, about how you have to work at that. But I also think metaphorically, it's like there's such a question of heritage and an ecological response to
mm,
where we are in this world. And hedges hold that so strongly in terms of they just hold that question. They really, really throw it up because what do we need right now? And this is not my phrasing. It's somebody that said this to me when I was looking at the planting guide for hedging, because we kept getting said, what do you plant on the hedge? What do you plant on the hedge? And we were taught, don't plant anything on the hedge. And I'm thinking, we need to plant trees, so it's like, oh my God, okay. And we keep getting asked. And somebody said to me, heritage just is a moment in time where you have the resources, you have the labor, and you have the need. And that's what you create as humans in that moment. And that's the response. So, and I'm thinking, what do we need in hedging now? What do we need? It's hedging is historically always been waste stone, recycled, repurposed, either, from the fields, and more stone as ploughing developed, so the hedges got a bit higher, but it's waste stone and it was local stone. And we're not in that situation anymore. And we don't have the big stone piles in the fields that the farmers used to have. They're not there. And so we've got to have this kind of question about how do we approach the hedge now? We've got to keep that craft skill alive, and we've restoring and repairing the hedges in the landscape, because we know they maximize habitat and biodiversity. And so to me, it's like a weaving then of, okay, what do we need? What does humanity need? How do we reconnect with the land? How do we reconnect with nature? We are nature. How do we go out and be in nature and feel that we also are nature? So I think with a kind of massive mental health crisis and these lovely, beautiful hedges that need repair in the landscape, there's such an obvious join up to happen there. And then there's a real question about sourcing stone in terms of new build hedges. And if mining opens up and suddenly there is so much waste stone, and hedges are fulfilling an ecological solution to waste stone, then it's great. But it's such a question, and it's such an of this moment. Do we continue? Do we take hedging into an extractive place, or can it be just regenerative? And can it
quarrying stone for a Cornish hedge doesn't feel right, does it? But to that point, could you also explain the difference between a craft hedge and a field context hedge, and why you're building your hedges extra wide? Because I think that's an interesting shift as well, to sort of answer that question.
So they're all craft built, and they're all really strong with masses of integrity. But the dressed granite hedge, which is the tight, it's behind me, I can't see me, but it's behind me in this photo. The tight fitting granite is a dressed granite hedge, lots of skill within the stone, very tight fit.
And when you say dressed, that's the stone that has been cut to the right shape.
With the hammer, it's been chiseled with the hammer, but literally, just hammer work, and most of it will be a lump hammer work. So basically, stone dressed with a hammer to create that sort of beautiful fit. And it is like a real craft and a real skill. But that's where we come from as the Guild of Cornish Hedgers, as craftspeople. That's what we were kind of, were taught this high level of skill. And then within CREST, the hedgers there, because of their incredible skill level, we really kind of lent into that. And then partway through, we were going, whoa, this is more like competition hedging. What about the landscape? What about the field? What about the farmers? And we had a couple of farmers, one farmer's grandson, come on training courses, and there was this wake up of going, we're not teaching what they need. We need a field context hedge. We need a style that is more about using the kind of eye within the stone, still stone dressing, but still using the eye, but basically the place for the gaps and the holes for habitat, for things to grow within it, for it to, because in some ways the craft built hedge is more of a hedge build, and the field context hedge is more of a hedge grow, because both are going to grow, but the field context will really take the green quicker, because you've got gaps, and you've got you've got a style within that as well that can work with any stone. So that to me is where my journey of really unfolding in an ecological understanding really blossomed for me, and it wasn't about the way of working the stone. It was about the life on the hedge, so we've created these structures that are going to be there for centuries. And I think the first time I realized through conversations around the hedge, but the first time I had that sense of, we could be building these hedges now, and we may not be here in 200 years' time. So that
We as in
sense of like,
humans.
yeah,
Mm,
we're, are we going to sink or are we going to rise? Are we going to sink? Are we building hedges that we may no longer see? Are they just for the wild now, in
mm,
centuries to come? And that was a really kind of like, oh my God, a real kind of moment of kind of understanding what we leave as legacy for whoever and whatever comes next, whether it's 2 legs or 4 legs, who's coming next. And I think within that work, alongside that kind of journey in myself, it was kind of felt really important to kind of bring that sense into the teaching, sort of this sense of awareness that we are leaving something for generations to come, and that's when I started putting time capsules in the hedge on a regular basis, because I think it's so important. It's so important. They say that we are directly affected by the last 200 years, which means we directly affect the next 200 years. And so we are here in this pivotal point. And I know that I can't remember who quoted it with that sense of like, we're the first generation to experience climate change. We're the last generation to do anything about it. It's us. It's like, this is the work with a capital T. This is the work. And it's like, what else is there to do other than to have these conversations and
yeah.
find those people that are also questioning on that level? Because we're just all making it up as we go along. But it's, yeah,
Yeah. And, making hedges that have space for nature,
yeah,
more space for nature, even if they're not exactly the same as the hedges that were being built 200 years ago, we have a
yeah,
different set of needs, and the planet has a different set of needs. And I thought the ones that you're building on your farm that are a bit wider than normal, to leave more space for tree roots, so that
yeah,
if we're not around in 200 years to replace them, to repair them, sorry, those trees can carry on growing and those hedges can carry on
yeah,
supporting biodiversity. Yeah, I mean, I found that whole conversation that we had, and we put a time capsule in the hedge we built, really, really moving and really thought provoking. And the exercise that you took us through before we did our time capsule, I'm going to see if I can remember the details, was that you told us if we walked 4 times around the boundary of your farm, that was life on Earth, with a stride representing 1 million years.
mm,
And then you pulled 30 centimeters out of a tape measure and told us on that scale that was human existence. And then our lifespans were we were probably an average age of 50-ish.
yeah,
That maybe a little bit younger. Several of us were around about 50. So our lifespan was kind of millimeters on that tape measure. And
yeah,
then in our lifespans, we've used as many resources as the whole of human existence.
yeah,
And you just think, God, how, if we talk about the last 200 years impacting us, we've sped that up so that the last 50 years even has had such a monumental impact. And there was a WWF report that came out last year, maybe the year before, and I don't remember the exact percentage. I will check it and put it in the show notes. But I think it was something like we've lost 73% of the world's biodiversity in my lifetime.
yeah.
And you sort of think, there's not a huge amount I can do about most of the world's problems, but I can create spaces for biodiversity. I can try and reverse that trend a little bit.
Mm. I know it's just I mean I think this last year I was so lucky to go on quite a few training courses that have really kind of opened my kind of thinking and introduced me to kind of writers like Joanna Macy and also Sharma's with Theory U and different things that have kind of really helped me in that sense of like, what is mine to do? What is
Yeah,
mine to do? What can I do?
yeah.
And that sense that it doesn't come from thinking it out. It just comes from sensing what is the next right thing to do.
Mm,
And I know that like Joseph Campbell says, if you see the path ahead of you, that's not your path. Your path is the one where you only see the next right thing. And
yeah.
like in so many ways, it's like this, that's what it's been like with hedging, with farming, with what is the next right thing to do.
Mm,
And And it's also that sense of trusting that within that, there's lots of us on that journey also holding that question. And I think the more kind of courage you have to kind of talk about it, it's just there's that more sense, people kind of go, oh, okay, I'll be, like the hedging courses give this space where people sort of say, yeah, I've been really anxious about that, but I can talk about it here. I can talk about that holding those difficult thoughts, sort of, and a lot of it is grief about where we are. There's grief about what we've lost, but to be able to hold that within a hedging course, because literally the stone and the earth and the build and the craft and the company just ground it so you can go to a really deep place because you're going to go and put your hands on the stone and the earth again. So it doesn't leave you up in the air. It leaves you in a sense of we're here together, creating something together. We're building something that for life to grow within. And so it's just, it feels to me like hedging, that whole sense of, I didn't set out to be a hedger in any way, but I think I obviously needed to be a hedger in order to be where I am now, because hedging is the story. Like you said, it's the metaphor of our time. It holds everything that we can question around who we are, what we're doing, what resources we're using. Are we in rhythm? Are we in season? Are we in flow? Who are we working with? What does it, and our sense of rewilding ourselves as we are working and supporting the kind of wild, and that we belong in the wild. I just feel like that sense, the hedges are where we belong. It's not the wild without humans. It's rewild our hearts to be at peace and to do what we can, to do as much good as we can.
Yeah. And that leads me very nicely to what I'm devastated to say is my last question, because I'm very much enjoying this conversation, Helen. That I think something I try really hard to do is to hold the grief and hold the hope, and fully acknowledging what we've lost and what we are still losing, whilst trying to remain hopeful that the things we can do will make a difference. So it's something I call defiant hope. This idea of kind of hope in spite of, and an active hope, this idea that it's not just sitting back and hoping everything will be okay. It's getting your hands in the soil and doing something about it. So the last question I always ask is, what brings you hope for the future? What are you hopeful for? And how do you hold on to that hope when things get tough?
Yeah, okay. So I also have that sense and that recognition of active hope. It's a doing thing. It's not something to just kind of say, you got to do something, and I also think there's that hopeful thing around it, is that just trusting that if you are doing the right thing because it comes through you, you listen to what is coming through you, then you meet the right people, you talk, you have the right conversations, the right words come out of you at the right time, because they're ecocentric, not egocentric. There's this shift into, I'm in service to the earth, I'm in service to hedging, I'm in service to farming, whatever it is, it's a service role. So it's this sense of like, to just stay in service, recognize when I'm off kilter and have to go, oh, get back in. And to me, that shift is that we are evolving. We are evolving as humanity. And I think as everything is unraveling and everything is sliding slightly kind of into chaos, there's also this incredible movement amongst people of seeing things differently, and this shift in consciousness that I think is really tangible, and I'm constantly kind of surprised at meeting new people like yourself, and other people that have just sprung up, and I'm suddenly having a depth of conversation with somebody that I have never met before, because they're on the same page and they're needing that kind of resonance. And so there's this trust that, sort of this life force that is there, that is coming through, is going to be a guide, or is guiding, and things are changing. And there is this kind of whole, sort of momentum globally of agroecology and regenerative education, regenerative agriculture. It's there and it's bubbling and it's there, and it's not so difficult to tap into. And I think what's wonderful about things like podcasts, it's like I heard it said, like podcasts are like being around someone's campfire and hearing the stories of the campfire. And I thought, oh God, that's so nice. But I want a real fire. I
Yeah.
want people around a real fire.
Yeah.
So and there's other people that want to be around a real fire. And I think there's so many vehicles that can be used for connection and craft and song and poetry and fire and all these things that are so primal for us.
Mm.
And there's so many people that are kind of like not afraid to say this stuff. And 20 years ago, that was the fringe odd stuff that you lived out on the edge and you did kind of with your friends kind of out on the cliffs or whatever, but it was the stuff you did. Whereas now it's like, no, this is the heart of the community. This needs to be right in the middle. Put it in the middle and talk about it. This is normal.
Yeah.
So there is something, so that feels really hopeful, really hopeful. And then I suppose that bit of like when it gets tough, when it gets tough. I think I'm really fortunate that I, very young in my life, I had that sense of um, just that sense that there is a life force that pulses through us. And for me, it's it is that natural life force. It is nature, but that understanding more recently that I am nature, we are nature, has really kind of that's only fairly recently kind of really been easier for me to kind of bring into narrative. I think it's something I've always had, but I felt it was a difficult thing to say. And like that, I sense is it for me. So when it gets hard, it's almost like I've just got to go and walk and walk the dogs until I come to the end of the walk and I know what the next right thing is to do. If I try and think my way out of it, I've actually just got to go and walk it, be with the dogs, be on the cliffs, watch the sea, kind of, walk through the hedges, whatever it is, and just trust that, you know, I'll know what the next right thing is to do. I don't know where the end is at all in any way, but I will know what the next right thing to do is. And that everything is there to learn. It's like, it's that thing of, okay, so it's shit and it's tough, but what is it I need to learn? What's the lesson here? Because if I don't learn it now, it's going to come around again and I'm going to have to learn it again. So let me learn it now. I'm getting old, so let me learn it now. And I think that lovely kind of that acceptance, just not fighting anything, just going, okay, it's all for a reason. Just don't fight any of it. And kind of just,
I love that sense that whilst some parts of the world are unraveling, which they very much are, we can see that on the global stage, but that whilst that's happening, there are people doing the work of re-raveling something different or kind of weaving together something different. And as you say, those are the people who were edge walkers, but are becoming more and more central and more connected to each other. And I think that's really important, that sense of we might only each be doing a little part, but when you connect it all up, it's hopefully enough.
yeah. And I think it is that thing, isn't it? Is that when those people come together, something amazing emerges from it. And like none of us know. It's like you don't have to know.
Yeah.
You don't have to know. You just got to come together. That's all. And it's like that feels really exciting that there's more people going, okay, that's what needs to happen, and
And as you say, just the next right thing, not necessarily, we haven't got to see the whole path. We've just got to, I have a friend, Lauren Chang, who was actually on the podcast a long time ago. And she and I talk about this sort of thing a lot. And she has an expression, just put your hands in soil, babe, just put your hands in the soil. And she means literally and metaphorically. So do the sort of things we've been talking about, but also just do what's in front of you. And I think
Yeah.
it's such a grounding message, I think, in these times.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. I
Ah.
could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to try
Oh,
and keep it within the hour for the sake of the
yeah.
podcast. But
Okay.
thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Oh, that's lovely, Katie. Oh, great stuff.
Amazing. That was so good. So
Good.
that's my favorite podcast episode yet.
Oh, that's so nice.